at the base of it, I enjoy helping people. Um, some years ago, I got a call from an owner of a strip mall. I believe it was in the city of Riverside, and something happened. Somebody burned down their electrical system in the back of the back of the strip mall. So all of these mom and pop shops were out of power. They could not make money, right? So he's like, "Can you please help us?" And the next day, I was out there on site evaluating the situation. And the next day after that, I had drawings in their hands so that they can submit to Edison so that they can get a new system installed. So stuff like that, where I'm actually directly helping someone, I think that's really fulfilling. And then also now that I guess I'm considered a job creator, right? So it's awesome to be able to employ someone, um, and they're they're being fulfilled financially and professionally because of something that I started.
Today, guys, we have Anthony Winston of Winston Engineering, owner and operator, and he's kind enough to sit down with us today. Anthony was an electrical engineer by trade, right? And
Correct.
how long have you been operating Winston Engineering?
It's been about 5.5 years now. Time is flying by.
That's awesome. That is absolutely awesome. So we've done a number of these interviews from the perspective of the architectural foundation. And one of the things that we learned is that all the students that kind of come through our program don't necessarily want to be architects. They want exposure to the construction industry, right? They want to see kind of how things are from a number of different vantage points. And our program kind of gives them that opportunity. But really excited to kind of get your perspective from the engineering standpoint. And then as somebody who's come up and, as a minority, right? It's not something that we see a ton of, and that's hopefully something that we're kind of looking to grow in the space. So if we want to just jump right in, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself, your firm, and then your background?
Yeah, so again, I'm Anthony Winston, originally from Chicago. So moved from there when I was 14, and then eventually made my way out to the West, lived in Arizona for a little bit, but I eventually settled in California. And there, finished out high school there, was a pretty good student, pretty decent basketball player. And initially I wanted to go somewhere and walk on the team. Like I got recruited by some really small schools, but I knew I wanted to do engineering. So I went to Arizona State, and my goal was to try to walk on the team. And another buddy of mine who started out at engineering with me, he actually did. Engineering wasn't his thing, so he went over, I think, to business. But I kind of had to step back and say, all right, can I truly be an engineer if I pursue basketball? And I figured my chances of becoming an engineer were much greater than going to the NBA. So I decided not to do it. But it was a great decision. I only regret it during March Madness. That's about it. But no, I graduated, moved to Boston. Initially, I wanted to work for a utility, but I ended up working for Raytheon in their missile defense division, designing test stations that tested missile systems and radar systems. And after being out there for about 3 years, I wanted to get back out to California, be closer with family. And I eventually worked for a company called General Atomics, where, I was test director of certain programs for some Navy programs. Did some hybrid electric drive, massive motors. So that's where I really, really kind of cut my teeth in terms of management. And then I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I just didn't know how I was going to do it. I had one failed business trying to do product development for kitchen stuff. Like I designed like a self-basting crock pot, designed it in 3D and tried to market it, to people like Black and Decker and stuff like that. But it didn't go anywhere. But I knew I wanted to do my own thing. So I got my professional engineering license, so my PE license, and it's based in construction, and I knew I couldn't use it at General Atomics, and that's no fault of their own. It's just not their business model. So I uh, I took a pay cut and I quit and I worked for Helix Electric, which is a really big electrical contracting company. And so one of my first projects was the LA Federal Courthouse in downtown LA. And mind you, I'd never been on a construction site, right? Everything I learned about construction, I learned while studying for my PE exam, right? So um, got on the project. I was out in the field constantly because I hated sitting in a trailer because it was very boring. So I was always out in the field bugging the electricians, trying to understand electrical systems for buildings, which I found out was much simpler than, missile systems. Um, so after looking at drawings, I realized, hey, I could do this myself. Um, and I tried to convince them to start their own engineering division and just have me kind of lead it, but the company wasn't in that mindset at the moment. So I said, you know what, let me do my own thing. So I would drive an hour to the train station, then take a train an hour and a half into downtown LA. And instead of just, sitting on my phone on social media, I Googled how do you start a business, and that's kind of where Winston Engineering was born. And it's funny, even my company logo, I asked one of my train mates who I would see every day, like, what do you think of this? So it was an executive from Razor, the scooter
Hmm.
company. One of the guys was on the train, so shout out to Razor for that. Um, and then, initially I created a website and started posting on not social media, but Craigslist. And occasionally I would get some hits and people wanted to hire me to do some work. And I was sneaking out of the construction trailer to pick up answering calls from clients. Um, and I let Helix Electric know, hey, I started my own company, and it wasn't a conflict of interest, so they were okay with it. And after a while, probably about 6 months or so, I landed a big enough job where it would sustain us for 3 months, right? That's 3 months of our money. And my wife was pregnant at the time. So I had initially told her I wanted to start my own company, but she was a little leery. So once I started actually showing her that I could do it and getting clients, she hesitantly said yes. She was okay with it. And I walked away from a very good paying job, and I haven't looked back since.
That's awesome, man. And I personally can relate so much to what you just said because I just sat on my ultrasound this morning via Zoom because of COVID,
Yeah.
and my fiance is pregnant with our first right now, and
Congratulations.
thank you. Everything you just said is conversations we had, right? I walked away from a very stable position because this entrepreneur thing is, it's a lot of fun, it's a lot of work, but um, having your significant other on board and then starting a family and you're like, oh my god, what did I get
Yeah.
myself into? But
It's not just you. And
it's not just you.
I wish I wish I had the knowledge that I had to do this much sooner,
Hmm.
because then you could take a lot more chances.
Hmm.
When you
Yep.
have, a wife and kids, you can't.
Right. Right.
So it could be like, it could be life or death. Well, not life or death, but that's how it is in my head.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. You learn at such a fast pace as an entrepreneur. Like something like your logo. Like we're working on our third iteration of our logo right now, and I look back at the first one, and I'm like, man, that served us when we opened. But so much has changed since then. It's just like, oh
Hmm.
well, you just keep moving forward. But can you? You talked a little bit about kind of basketball and engineering, and the choice to become an engineer. Can you talk a little bit more about that and kind of what influenced that? And the thinking there, because that's something, and I'll include myself in this. When I went to junior college, I was playing football, and I was looking at football. I wasn't looking at what I was going to do beyond that, and
Yeah.
that's a really really important decision to be able to make, kind of in that 18 to 22-year-old range. So
Yeah, I think it comes down to being brutally honest with yourself. Um, I went to high school in Riverside County, Rancho Verde High School, Moreno Valley, and my senior year, I think I was maybe ranked in the top 10 or 15 in the county, right? So it's not bad, but it's not amazing, right? When you go to a D1 school, you're playing against the number one people from all over the world sometimes, right? So I had to be honest with myself and realize, yeah, I was good there, but can I really do this? And I knew the energy and the effort that I would have to put in to get to that point would not allow me to be an engineer. I
Hmm.
mean, if once you start getting into your upper division courses, I mean, let's say my quantum physics class, right? Would the team really have a quantum physics tutor on the road with us? So and I was very good in high school, but when I got to college, I needed a lot more help. So I was always knocking down the doors of my professors to get help. Um, that's just how I was, right? So I needed to get that answer to pass that exam or pass that test, and I knew I wasn't going to get that help on the road. Maybe if I was like, I don't know, a Kobe prospect, right? The
Right.
team will do whatever they can, but
Right.
if you're kind of at the bottom of the barrel, you got to figure that out on your own. So,
Right. That's gosh, that's my fiance played softball at UCLA, and when she was pretty highly recruited, and she was picking schools based off education because she thought she was going to be an engineer. She ended up going to medical, but man, I wish I had that wisdom at that age. Like
yeah,
she was literally planning, the undergrad and then graduate school after that. I'm like, good for you. Like
yeah.
that is awesome.
And I tried it again. Like I lived in Boston. I was in a semi-pro league where if you do well, they have recruiters from overseas looking at you, and you can go play overseas.
Hmm.
And at that time, I was an engineer making pretty decent money. I'm playing against kids out of college who this is how they eat.
Hmm.
So that type of drive is going to outwork me every time, right?
Hmm. Right.
So
Right.
I ended up tearing my meniscus, and I was like, all right, that's enough of that.
Right. Yeah. I tore my ACL at 21, and I was like, all right, you know what? We're just gonna go ahead and call it now.
Yep.
Uh, awesome. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what are some of the favorite parts of your job, or the things that you get to do on a regular basis that are really fulfilling to you, kind of through being an entrepreneur and through being an engineer?
Um, well, that's a big question. Um, at the base of it, I enjoy helping people. Um, some years ago, I got a call from an owner of a strip mall. I believe it was in the city of Riverside, and something happened. Somebody burned down their electrical system in the back of the back of the strip mall. So all of these mom and pop shops were out of power. They could not make money, right? So he's like, "Can you please help us?" And the next day, I was out there on site evaluating the situation. And the next day after that, I had drawings in their hands so that they could submit to Edison so that they can get a new system installed. So stuff like that, where I'm actually directly helping someone, I think that's really fulfilling. And then also now that I guess I'm considered a job creator, right? So it's awesome to be able to employ someone, um, and they're being fulfilled financially and professionally because of something that I started.
Right. Right.
So
That's a
like,
Go ahead.
yes,
Sorry.
so like I have a vet. He's a Purple Heart who works for me, and when he initially approached me, he was like, "Hey, I want to get an internship," and I said, "Hey, learn Revit." And I didn't take him seriously because I get requests all the time. And about I don't know, a week or a month later, he came back and said, "I learned Revit." And I said, "Really?" So I gave him a little test, and he got through it. I hired him as an intern, I believe that next day, and he graduated from college. Now he's a full-time engineer with me. So he's on his way to being licensed, and we've had some discussions about him becoming kind of really up there in terms of the company. So
Right.
those I love those kind of relationships. And then in terms of the business, I like business development. The engineering work is cool, right? But after a certain amount of time, you want to kind of let your guys deal with the engineering portion of it. Of course, I'm heavily involved with the design and improving things. But I like the business development. I think I told someone today, I enjoy fishing, not necessarily, gutting and frying up the fish, right? So I like to go out there and network and get the clients and really help people, and then just kind of get them to our team, so our team can take care of them the way they should. And of course, I step in when I need to, when it's something that the team can't handle on their own. So, but
Right.
that's a testament of having a really solid team.
That is, you need to have a really solid team behind you to be able to do something like that. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. If you're
Yeah.
going to be a successful business owner in whatever you do, right? No matter whether
Mhm.
it's engineering, whether it's, in architecture, whether it's risk management, all that, you need to enjoy the business side of it and the business development side of it at least as much as you enjoy the actual craft. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I see that sometimes where somebody really just they love their craft, and that's amazing. And I love to support people who just want to do that. Oftentimes those people are best served, working on a team, working for somebody so that they can just really like dive
Yeah.
into it 100%. So
That's where a lot of people fail, is the business side of things. They could be amazing architects or, mechanics, or I don't care what it is.
mhm.
If they don't have that, if you don't have that business development, it's done. You got to build the business first.
Right. I'm seeing that right now, actually, too. I have a fair number of clients who are kind of in that sole proprietor to maybe like 2, 3, 5 employees, and some of them are thriving, or at least hanging in just fine in kind of this COVID environment, and some of them are not so much. And it's a lot of it is that business development, right?
Hmm.
Was the time spent uh, on the business, not in the business, right? Were you
Yeah.
doing those things necessary to be able to look ahead, where if one of your clients backed out tomorrow, are you still going to be able to make payroll? Are you still going to be able to to keep it going? So
Yeah, and I think if somebody who's struggling now in COVID, and they're like, oh man, I need to start networking, going to LinkedIn, doing social media, it's too late right now,
mm,
because all the contacts that I make contact with on these platforms, I assume I'm not going to do any work for you until a year from now. So you have to constantly be filling, constantly fill that pipeline with contacts, and hopefully within a year you'll be able to assist them with what they need. Sometimes it's 2 years.
right, right, yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one, but we're at least hopefully out there, and we have a network for those people. If for some reason the firm needs to close down, or those people are in trouble right now, we're kind of able to find them positions and make it work, so you can at least put food on the table and
Yeah.
keep something going. But can we flip that and go other end of the spectrum and say what has been one of the hardest parts of your journey, or just something that's just difficult to deal with on a regular basis?
um I think social media is a big culprit of this, is that it's that iceberg image, where on the top you just see that small little tip, but underneath it's a whole lot of stuff going on that people don't see. They only see the good stuff typically on social media. So it's a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs and people who claim to be entrepreneurs, who don't talk about the nuts and bolts of it, and that involves working with people, your clients, your employees. But the most difficult part of that is managing clients, because you're dealing with all types of personalities. You're dealing with people who may not be very professional. Um, I think very early on, I got into it with a client, and it was pretty bad. The situation was that, my wife was in the hospital giving birth. She had just given birth, and then they called me. They kept calling me and calling me, saying, "Hey, we really need you to do this project. We'll pay you whatever." And so I said, all right. So I had my laptop in the hospital room while they're sleeping, working on this project. And then they decided they didn't want to pay me. And I found out later that they got kicked off the job. Um, but then they tried to put blame on me. And I think what really upset me is that, I'm doing this while I shouldn't be doing it. I should have been completely present. at that moment, and I lost it. And that was a lesson learned that no matter what, keep your cool, because it
Yeah.
doesn't serve anybody for both parties to be, very combative.
Right. Right. I literally just heard this story today. A friend of mine who's also an entrepreneur, and she had like a Calendly type, like calendar link type service, and a prospective client of hers went and booked. This was last year sometime, and actually booked on Christmas Day,
Oh wow.
and she hadn't blocked it out. And in the client's defense, she hadn't cleared it, and so she messaged the client and said, "Hey, it's Christmas Day. Not going to be working that day." And and there was a back and forth. There was like, it's like, well, but I booked it. It's like, you're right, you did, but it's a national holiday. It's one of the biggest holidays there is. Come to find out, this particular prospective client was an owner, specifically a restaurant owner, who kept his restaurant closed on Sundays. Right. So this guy literally had closed his restaurant 52 days out of the year at least, and then probably on other holidays, and wanted,
Mhm.
this friend of mine, this entrepreneur, to work. And it's just like, man, sometimes the best thing we can do is be selective about who we work with, right?
Yeah, and that's one
But
thing I learned, is that I think I wrote a blog about it. We're not Burger King. You don't have it your way. Especially when it comes to
yeah.
engineering, and we have to do things by the book. I've been asked to do illegal things, right? And I'm like, no, I'm not sacrificing, one, human safety, and then two, me losing my license.
hmm
That's
Right.
not going to happen.
Right.
So we recently just got a new director of operations, and she's very customer service driven and wants to please our clients, which is amazing. But we recently had a situation where a client was kind of being a bit rude, and I said, you know what, we not every client is for us, right? We're not for every
hmm
client. So you just have to understand that sometimes you got to let some business go
hmm
before you
Yeah.
you do what I did and blow up, right?
Right. There's a book called Essentialism by Graham McCown. You ever heard of Essentialism? He
No.
tells a story very similar to yours. He was literally in the hospital room for the birth of his first child, and he was working, and some, along the same lines. I don't remember what the exact details were, but it ended up turning into nothing. And he was just like, all right, I am going to be very selective, right? We're going to go an inch wide and a mile deep on things that we choose are incredibly important. But then a
Mhm.
part of that is just saying no to a lot. And that's been a lesson I've learned this year, is just kind of figuring out that you have to say no to a lot of good things. And sometimes that's
Yeah.
business, sometimes that's clients, right? Sometimes you have to say no to something so that you can, go deep on in something else, or give your all somewhere else. And
Yep.
um, I'm always very impressed by folks who can say that, which is, we can't take on that particular project right now. We just don't have capacity, and I wouldn't want to water down what we're doing, right? I wouldn't
Hmm.
want to give you a lesser version of that. So I can always respect somebody who does that.
That takes a lot of discipline, and it
It does.
it doesn't happen to us often where we have to say, we don't necessarily turn down projects, but we'll say we can't get to you until this date. And there have been times where, like, well, we just can't wait, and I'm like, oh, I can't
Mhm.
sacrifice the time I'm supposed to spend on another client. And
Right.
sometimes they'll say, I'll pay you anything, and I'm like, my reputation is more important than money.
Right. Yeah, you want to avoid kind of that contractor stigma of taking on all these projects and then not being able to,
Hmm.
disperse resources in the way. My first two jobs were in construction as a laborer, and I remember being sent to this project over here, and then we spent this one time over there, and then something broke, and it's like, okay, well, we'll get to that eventually. And it was like, ooh, man, but
Yeah.
broken, like we need to deal with that. So, awesome. Um, is there a particular project that you have in mind that is maybe something that was really challenging, that you kind of had to solve a particular problem on, or just something that stands out in your mind as like a big lesson learned, kind of like what you were just talking about?
Um, every project is a lesson learned, to be honest with you. Um, that's kind of a tough one. I
Is
think, in terms of lesson learned, we worked on a indoor agricultural facility. This particular project was in Paris, California, And at the time, I didn't have HVAC and plumbing in-house. I had to sub it out to another firm. And the other firm, they're much larger than I am. They're still out there. They're way bigger than I am. And I subbed the work out to them, and it was just a struggle because they're so big. They have so many projects that they can't give you all they can't give you all of their attention. So the project suffered, and in the process, it made me look bad, right? So I had to take a step back and say, all right, I have to be more in control. In order to do that, I have to have my own resources. So that really taught me that you try not to sub out, you try not to sub as much as you possibly can. Um, you try to either train your employees to do certain tasks, or you go out and get the right resources. And quite often that can be expensive, but it works out in the long run.
Right, right. That's a good lesson. That's an important lesson. So as far as leadership, is there anybody that stands out in your mind as kind of a leader, either somebody that you looked up to and admired that maybe influenced whether or not you ended up becoming an engineer, or even somebody who's a peer, or even a friendly competitor, or somebody like that that stands out in your mind as far as kind of leadership, whether thought leadership or otherwise in engineering in the construction field?
Leadership in construction, not really, because I got into this industry not having any contacts whatsoever in construction. So I stumbled a lot in the beginning stages, trying to figure out pricing, trying to figure out who my target market is. I didn't have anybody to ask because most of those individuals who I know in engineering, they worked for somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have an entrepreneur to go to. I did have, I do have a fraternity brother who owns his own. I think they do like industrial construction.
Mm-hmm.
So I could talk to him about very specific things. Like he told me, you always have a general ledger. Get yourself a trust, a family trust, things like
Mm-hmm.
that. But in terms of like the nuts and bolts of running a MEP engineering firm, I didn't. I had zero resources.
Gotcha. So you're just figuring it out on your own as you went, huh?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you just see what works.
I love it. Can you talk now as a business owner, as somebody who does have to be a leader to the employees of your firm and kind of in the community? Is there anything you notice that's specific to kind of leading design professionals, versus maybe being a leader on a basketball team or in sports, something along those lines?
I think it's all the same, to be honest with you.
Come.
You're trying to lead people. You all have a common goal in mind. Simon Sinek has a book, Leaders Eat Last.
Great
That's
book.
one of my favorites of his. And he equates leadership to more of a tribal. He compares it to like the days of tribes, right? So you have this single leader, and he's responsible for the safety and the care of his tribe. And if something goes wrong, he or she doesn't turn around and say, "Oh, it's your fault." The leader takes on all that blame. So if something goes wrong with Winston Engineering, Anthony Winston is responsible, right? Not necessarily my engineers. At least I won't say that to the public, right? You always have to be a tight team. So if something goes wrong, it's on me, and it's my responsibility to figure out why that happened. Like you got to do some root cause analysis. And if my employees mess up or whatever the case may be, I don't automatically look at them and say, "Oh, it's your fault." I look and see, what did I do wrong, right? Was there some type of direction that I gave that wasn't clear and concise that led them down this path? Um, and then we just figure out how to fix it and move on. And 9 times out of 10, it doesn't happen again.
Right.
So I think that's the important part of being a leader. I mean, unfortunately, we have some politicians. I won't name their names, but when things go wrong, they like to point fingers and publicly
Mhm.
point fingers. And I think that that shows a lot of weakness, to be honest with you.
Right. I agree. So Simon Sinek Start With Why was
Yep.
the book that made me think that I could actually be an entrepreneur. And I remember watching a talk that he gave, and it was probably about Leaders Eat Last. I have not read it. I need to, because I love him as an author. And he was talking about how do you bring somebody along on your team and get buy-in. And it was take ownership, right? Which is, I got you. I'm going to be asking you to do things. I'm going to kind of ask you to step outside of your comfort zone a little bit. You're going to make mistakes, not like you might make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes, and I will own those mistakes for you to the client, right? You got to be able to come back with me and we'll figure out what went wrong. But to anybody that might point a finger at you, like that's, I'm the shield there. And then I want your feedback, right? Whether you're a person who's first day on the job or you've been doing this for 30 years, you're my right-hand person. I want you to have a vested interest. And if you think that there's a better way to do something, bring it up, right? It's not necessarily, we have systems for a reason and we built those things. It's not that, everything is, but if if you see something that's going on, I want to know about it. And I remember doing that with, at my prior firm, with a person that we had just hired, and he wasn't sure that he wanted to be in our industry. He was kind of just figuring it out. And he stayed because of that buy-in. He stayed because of those leadership lessons. And I was fascinated by that. That really, and I felt connected to him and he felt connected to me. And what I'm getting at there is that I'm hearing from a lot of agency owners, architects and engineers, that kind of this generation is missing a little bit of that leadership, right? They're missing a little bit of that. I want to go in and learn it. I want to be a part of it. I want the next level. Kind of, you were talking about an employee, the veteran, right? Who's like, I want it. I'm going to go after it. I'm going to get it, right? Whether that's initiative, I don't know what it is, but I think the way that we're trying to treat that is just to show them what's possible. Just show them what's out there. It's not right for everybody by any means. Entrepreneurship is not right for everybody, but just kind of, even if you wanted to stay within your own firm, taking that leadership and being willing to follow as much as being a leader, right? Being willing to come under somebody and then also turn around to maybe the team below you and be able to do that.
And I'll push back on that a little bit. I don't necessarily think it's generational, because I think every generation has that, oh, well, back in my day, we did this, right? And we're no different. We look at the youngsters and like, oh, they seem like they don't want it. Like, is it video games? Is it social media? But obviously I didn't have social media as a kid, but people said the same thing about my generation and, in general. Right, I'm a millennial, so, or at least one of the beginning stages of a millennial. So millennials get bashed all the time.
Right. You know what? You're right. You are right. And every generation, it feels like, you kind of look down and say, oh, well, they don't work as hard, or they don't do these things. At some point, if we're talking about ownership, we have to kind of take the mirror, hold it up and say, are we doing the things necessary to retain folks? Because I've also heard that message echoed from firms, and then you go in and you look at the culture and you look at the way you're run, and I'm like, within 5 minutes I can tell you exactly why nobody wants to stay here. Right? This is a starting position. It's not a long-term position. And so sometimes we just have to inspect what we expect, right? And look, and I bet we could do a lot more of that. So I love it. So last question for you here. And before we do that, can you tell us just like where folks can find you on social media? I think your banner has your website there, but is it WinstonEng.com?
Yep, WinstonEng.com. You can follow us on Instagram, just search Winston Engineering. I'm on Twitter, Winston Engineering, Facebook, Winston Engineering, LinkedIn. You search my name on LinkedIn, Anthony Winston III, I'll pop up. So yeah, I'm always posting. Actually, my latest post was that we're looking for a new MEP drafter. So
perfect.
Had a really solid interview today. Got some more lined up for Monday, but these hires are pretty critical. So
awesome.
I'm always posting, always engaging. I get people all the time, hitting me up saying, hey, I like what you're doing. I want to do the same thing, and I'll give them the information.
Right.
if you're not willing to put in the work, please don't waste my time, right? Because that
Very fair.
happens quite often. People ask you for advice on stuff, and then they don't follow through. Then it's like you just wasted 20 minutes of my time for
Right.
nothing.
Right.
So
Right. And then as far as who you're looking to collaborate with, is it primarily architects, or like who would be a great person for you to meet?
Architects, contractors, developers,
Okay.
pretty much anybody in the construction realm, right? The gatekeepers. Sometimes I get subs like electrical contractors who will bring me on to a project, and then I'll contract directly with the client.
Gotcha.
But yeah, that's really kind of the bread and butter. Or if you're just an owner of a business who has a new building going up, like I work
Mhm.
with people who franchise different restaurants and stuff like that. So
Perfect. Perfect. Awesome. All right. So the last question for you here is, what is the best advice that you could give to an up and coming design professional?
well, it's a couple things. First, learn the business. I think I wish I had, and I don't have regrets, but it probably would have made my job easier if I had worked for an MEP firm prior to starting my business. But maybe that made me work extra hard to figure things out. So definitely dive in and work for somebody and understand the business development side of that. And if be open and honest with your boss, like, hey, one day I want to start my own firm. How do you run a business, right? And most business owners worth their salt will actually go and teach you.
Right.
If one of my employees want to do their own thing eventually, I have no problem training them, right? Because I want you to be happy, whether that's with me or not.
Right.
Um, and then also like constantly read books and on business development and stuff like that. Like The Right It is another book that I just I'm getting through now, but it talks about prototyping. So um, not prototyping, but prototyping. So I'll give you an example. IBM apparently came up with talk to text decades ago, but they didn't know how they were going to do it or if anybody would be interested. So they sat someone down in front of a computer, what looked like a computer, and had the person talk. And the person saw what they said on the screen. And they're like, oh, this is kind of cool. But they didn't know it was somebody in another room typing. So instead of spending all the money to develop a prototype, they did that to kind of gauge if people would be interested in it. So the book teaches you how to spend a heck of a lot less money and a lot less time on your idea. And that's if you want to be a firm owner or if you want to be an app developer or whatever the case may be. Um, that's the route you take. Someone who wanted to open up a bookstore, she just rented out an empty building and put a sign, a bookstore is coming. And she started to kind of gaze to see what kind of traffic she would get and people being interested. And that gave her some data, right? So that's a really good book to read. And then also Slicing Pie, which if you're starting a business with a partner, whether that's a firm or a restaurant or whatever the case may be, it teaches you how to literally slice, not literally, but how to slice the equity pie,
Mm.
and gives you some really concrete ways of doing that. For instance, I'm working on a startup, and initially I've been doing a lot more of the work on the front end because I know how to start a business.
Mm.
Where my partner, not necessarily, he hasn't had as much experience. So right now, my equity portion is much higher than his right now. Maybe in a month from now, he'll be the one stepping in to do
Mhm.
a lot more work. So it kind of teaches you how to slice the pie based on the time you put in and the actual physical dollars that you put into the business. So
Right.
those two books that one of my business mentors gave me have been game changers for me.
Right.
So that's something any aspiring entrepreneur should be looking at, or design professional.
I love it. I love it. Solid advice. Awesome, sir. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you
This
for
has been
having me.
absolutely amazing. And Anthony Winston, we will put all the contact info, and then when this goes live, we'll make sure to tag in the post. And thanks again for doing this, Anthony. Really appreciate it.
All right, thank you.